Hi, let's get right into things. You saw the video title, you know what you're here for. This video will serve as your guide for the extra stage of Touhou 6, the embodiment of Scarlet Devil, aka EoSD. I'll be explaining how to get through the stage portion, the mid-boss fight, and obviously the boss fight itself too. I'll be using Reimu B as my shot type throughout most of the video. EoSD's shot types are pretty bog standard, shoot bullets forward and hit things, outside of Reimu A, who trades some of her damage or homing amulets. If by chance any sections should be tackled differently as Reimu A, I'll be sure to make a note of that. This video's primary target audience is players who just want some help clearing extra. Its secondary audience is people that just want to watch Touhou related content and maybe learn some cool facts about the characters and their spell cards that they didn't know before. I'll be using the English Touhou wiki for some info, but I know Japanese, so I'll also be making use of the Japanese Touhou Moteneta wiki to a degree. Moteneta means source material, and the wiki is basically there to explain the origins behind everything in Touhou. I'd also like to give a quick thanks to the Touhou Patch Center for their wonderful English patches. Lastly, I'd also like to give a shout out to the Universal Practice Tool, aka Touhou Prac, since it's what I'll be using to quickly move around the game and gather my footage. All of these resources will be linked in the description. I'll also be using Touhou Prac to freeze the game's rank slider at its max, which for extra mode specifically is at 18. That will ensure that any rank affected patterns will be at their hardest. I'll be starting off stage portions with some pacifist footage with invincibility turned on in order to clearly show off what the enemies do. I'll then follow up showing you how to tackle each individual section. I'll be doing roughly the same thing for bosses. I didn't think to do this in my Lunatic video, but this time around I'll sometimes freeze the timer during boss patterns using Touhou Prac, so less cuts are required. In addition, you can find full timestamps in the description so you can easily jump around and check out individual sections. Each boss pattern will also receive a rating of 1 to 5 stars based on how difficult it is, which will be displayed in the upper left corner when that pattern section begins. I think that covers the preamble, so let's get started. This stage opens with 4 double-layered waves of blue fairies that fire aimed pellets, starting at the left and alternating between sides. Next up, a line of red fairies will descend onto the screen, one by one, starting from the right side and fire out circles of aimed lines. Each fairy will fire just a single time before turning around and leaving. You'll repeat this again, and then you'll have 2 more lines starting from the left side instead. Come to think of it, I've been referring to fairies by their clothing color and just hoping it's obvious what I mean, but I'm sure it is. After that, a red fairy, this time literally a red fairy with a grey dress, not a fairy dressed in red, will appear. It'll fire 2 bullet spirals which move at different speeds, but it doesn't aim anywhere in particular, and nor do the rest of the fairies in the first half of the stage. These spirals' positions also aren't linked to one another, so they can be layered differently, leading to a lot of unpredictability. 2 more fairies will then appear in the corners and repeat the same pattern. After that will be some more sunburnt fairies that fire the slow portion of the same spiral 4 times in alternating directions. There'll be one in the middle, one slightly to the left, one slightly to the right, and then a 4th and final one in the middle again. Last up will be the extra stage's so-called Death Fairy, a fairy with a ton of HP and a really long pattern. It'll fire out thin, unfolding spirals of red bullets in one direction, and a spiral of somewhat closely packed blue walls in the other. With each wave, more arms will be added to each spiral. It'll do 6 waves of each color in total. Now onto the routing. The first section with the aimed pellets isn't really too difficult to dodge. Don't stress over picking up power items here. It will help if you can get a couple shot upgrades before the next section, but they're not strictly needed. Take out the first 3 waves as they spawn on the left, right, and left, then stay on the right after taking out the final one. When the red fairies start to show up, track them across the screen as they appear and take out as many as you can before they can fire. You actually have enough damage to do this even at 0 power, though the timing can be tricky unless you're really high up. Curiously enough, Zone actually placed some fairies outside of the screen here that can't be taken out with 0 power due to how thin your shot's range is. As you return to the right to get in line for the second wave, try to pick up a couple straight power items. If you're playing Marissa, you'll have time to make it all the way back to the right before the next wave begins firing. Reimu players, on the other hand, will have to give up on perfection here unless they have a lot of power. You'll have a bit of delay between the second and third waves where you can grab a couple more power items. After that, get in position and do the same thing again but in reverse. Your goal here isn't necessarily to take out every single fairy. Instead, you should aim to end this section at 120 power or higher, but without actually reaching full power. This all makes sense soon, I promise. For the section with the spiral fairies, we're actually going to ignore the center fairy entirely and wait on the right side of the screen. Dodge around the center fairy's Danmaku and shotgun the one on the right. If done well, you should be able to take it down early into its second spiral, or potentially before it can even start it. You can shotgun the center fairy and still have time to do this, but the randomly aimed walls can make this difficult if you're unlucky, so I'd recommend against it. The whole reason you want to do this at all, by the way, is because the walls can overlap in potentially dangerous ways like this if all the fairies are left alive. If you're low in power during this part, try to grab a bit from the fairies to get yourself above the 120 threshold if possible, but still down below 128. After the first 3 spiral fairies, quickly move to the center and fire on the first one of the second wave from a distance. Stay in the center after taking it out and collect one of its large power items to trigger a screen clear. This screen clear should occur when the last fairy of the wave is firing and should make dodging what it has left close to trivial. Oh, and I would also like to clarify that going for a full power clear here is a well-known strategy that I've heard a few times over the years. It's not something that I came up with on my own. All that lies between us and the stage's midway point now is the mansion's resident Death Fairy. This section is heavily RNG based, so every time will be a little bit different, but you can maximize your odds here by dodging in the left corner. The fairy is invincible until it's done firing, so don't pay the least bit of attention to damaging it. Anyway, the reason that the left corner is ideal is because of how the blue walls unfold. Being in the left side will mean that the slow side will be toward the inside, allowing you to move inward if you find yourself in a tricky spot. If you dodge on the right side instead, you'll have less time to move toward the inside, and moving further out involves heading up the screen, which puts you closer to the fairy, and therefore closer to danger. Our static mid-boss today is Patchouli Knowledge, the girl of knowledge and shade. This is originally where I went into a tangent about the style of magic she uses, which was interesting in its own right, but it was a bit complicated, so let's go with a different fact instead. Her ribbons aren't just ordinary ribbons, but apparently ones that buff her magic. Neat. Something else I didn't know is that the title One Week Magician that's often used for her is actually an unofficial fan creation. This last one's less of a fact and more of an open question, but why is her palette totally different than Extra? She's also flipped horizontally. Lots of just general weirdness here. Patchy's first card here is Moonsign, Silent Selene. Selene is actually written as Serena in Japanese here. Selene is the name of the Greek goddess of the moon, while Serena is Latin for quiet. The Greek goddess's name, however, is not written as Serena in Japanese, and is instead written as Selene instead. I don't know why this card uses Selene in its English translation, but unless there's something I'm not aware of here, I don't think I agree with the choice. Anyway, needless grumbling aside, there are 2 aspects to this card. The first is a rain of blue bolts that spawn randomly near the top of the screen and fall downward at differing speeds. The second is a half circle of aqua-colored lines representing moonlight that Patchy fires in 2 different configurations that complement each other. As the card progresses, she'll quickly begin filling out the missing half until it becomes a full moon. Start off by shotgunning as close as you safely can. It can depend on the RNG you get, but typically you should be able to take out about half of Patchy's HP before you have to give up and move a good distance away. There's a delay between when a bullet's effect appears and when the actual bullet spawns, giving you a decent window to react if you see one start to spawn on or near you. Once you've been pushed back down the screen, dodge underneath Patchy and follow her around as she moves. Unlike Emerald Megalith, which can only spawn bullets in a fixed range around Patchy, the blue bullets here can spawn anywhere, so no part of the screen is necessarily less dense. Dodging in the corners can be unsafe here because the aqua lines can turn into walls that can trap you against the blue bullets depending on how Patchy moves. Try to keep as close to the center lines, the ones that move straight downward, as possible. Patchy's second card is Sun Sign, Royal Flare. She'll create a number of points that'll spin outward from the center of the screen, forming static patterns of curved walls. This attack is split into sets of 4 waves before Patchy will spawn and start of another set, and the number of points per wave goes 3, 5, 6, 5. The rest is better to see for yourself, so I'll let a full set of 4 waves play uninterrupted. Royal Flare demands the most memorization out of all the cards EoSD has to offer, but it's very, very low difficulty in the execution scale once you have a route for it. Use the route that I recommend taking, and from memory, I think this might be the popular route that most players take, or at least similar to it. Start at the bottom and keep focus on Patchy for the first wave. The only 2 walls you'll need to dodge from the first wave are these ones. I recommend dodging through them with careful diagonal movements against the bottom of the screen. A few moments after you get through the second wall, you'll see this dense tail over here. Quickly dart to the left and get around it. You have a couple choices here. I think a lot of players move back down to the corner and let the next wave harmlessly pass over them, then move to the next 2 before making a quick dash back to the middle. However, after some experimentation, my favorite method for this part is to move a bit to the right after getting around the tail. This will make this wall spawn to your left instead. The bullet layout still results in you dodging through 3 walls here, but you'll be back in the center after passing through the first one, giving you far more time to react to the close range waves. You also deal damage faster this way, often letting you in the card a few bullets before the last wave can even finish. Either way, once you're back in the middle, make minimal movements, then dodge the last 2 waves as they come your way. The chance of mistakenly moving into a bullet is more of a threat than one actually hitting you. Be especially careful with the last bullets since they'll spawn pretty close to you. Watch out for this guy in particular and make sure you don't panic dodge into him when he starts to appear. The latter sets of waves of Royal Flare aren't the same as the first, so you'll have to wing it if you end up going into overtime. but even then it shouldn't take you more than a few extra seconds to take Patchy down, you know, unless you just took your finger off the shot button or something. By the way, though Royal Floor is fully static, it's still a math equation, so the individual waves weren't programmed in or anything. That means that it'll keep on changing as it goes on. The first, second, and fourth waves consistently get faster, but the third wave's speed always remains the same. The acceleration for each set is quite slow and barely noticeable during normal gameplay, so I wonder why I don't even bother it, and if the third wave not getting faster is maybe a bug. Okay, so I have a confession to make. Until now, I hadn't really messed with Mercia shot types much. My assumption was that Mercia A had a bit more damage, and Mercia B had piercing lasers and Master Spark. And sure, that's not entirely incorrect, but I hadn't realized just how massive the DPS difference was until it was pointed out to me. If you're doing this card with Mercia A, it's literally over after you dodge through the first two walls. Thanks again to a certain nameless fairy for prompting me to try the shot types here. I promise I'll be more attentive with that sort of thing in the future. This may spark controversy, but this card is pretty reliably cleared when learned, so I'm just rating it 2 stars on the difficulty scale. It's an easy 4 or 5 if you're going into it totally blind though, and of course it's only a 1 if you're Mercia A. Patchy's last card before she finally leaves us alone and goes back to bed is Fire, Water, Wood, Metal, Earth Sign, Philosopher's Stone. A real mouthful, and I feel like just saying 5 elements could be a good compromise. After the research I did for the tangent I almost went into earlier though, I can see why you might want to state this clearly. Patchy will summon 5 books that'll spew out their own elemental attacks on their own timers. The Water book will fire aimed, double-layered half circles. The Earth book will fire clusters of bullets towards you that stop, then change direction after a bit. The Fire book will shoot out 2 double-layered rings with positions independent of each other. The Wood book will fire at bullets that blow toward the left after a delay. And lastly, the Metal book will fire at those lame circles that move toward you like in Silver Dragon. All of the books are invincible, and your shots will actually just pass right through them. Shotgun Patchy for a moment once the card starts, then move back a bit to avoid getting potentially jump scared by the fire bullets. Continue slowly backing away until the Water book is fired at its second wave, then move to the bottom of the screen, and try to position yourself to the left of the line it just fired at you. From there, slowly stream to the right, dodging whatever comes your way. If you reach the point where you're not damaging Patchy anymore, time your movements with the Water book and start streaming back to the left. You'll typically already have her down by that point, as long as the RNG doesn't force you to move around too much though. Patchy will drop a life after going down, so make sure you pick it up. This stage resumes with 5 configurations of red fairies that fire out 2 different types of fast, dense bullet clusters at you. You know, I guess this applies to the ones from earlier too, but has anyone else noticed that they change color after firing? They actually start off as more of a purple, I guess. Anyway, after all 5 waves, you'll have another 4 waves of the same blue fairies from the start of the stage, but this time they fire 3 bullets each instead of just 1. After that will be a section of 4 waves of 5 books each. The books have their own patterns, but they're not super interesting and can generally be summed up with red equals spam, blue equals aimed. Their horizontal spawn positions are random, but their vertical ones are fixed. On that note, I was actually informed after putting up my Lunatic video that this is a trait also possessed by the stage 4 books, so a quick addendum about that. You're actually better off shooting the second book in that section since the first one is more likely to get blocked by another one, thanks to the kind nameless fairy who told me about this. Anyway, next up, 10 books will spawn at pretty much the same time, 2 of each type. Once they've finished littering the screen, you'll have another 4 waves of the blue 3-wave fairies before the stage comes to an end. The very last one will drop a life for you. You should start on the left side for the cluster fairies. Dodge the first wave to the right, the second to the left, and then the third to the right again. When the 4th wave comes out, stream it partway across the screen, but wait for the 5th wave to finish before going all the way to the left. If you do that, you'll be in position to shoot down most of the first wave of blue fairies, so position yourself a little to the left of where they spawn, then stream right for all 4 waves. For the books, begin in the middle of the screen and start streaming to the right. The books will appear in the order red, red, blue, blue, red, so once you've confirmed that the 4th book of a wave has finished firing, use that time to move to the right edge to distance yourself from the blue bullets. Stream the next wave back to the middle, then the 3rd wave to the right, then the 4th wave back to the middle. After the 4th wave is done, take the time before the double wave appears to get into the middle and stream to the left. Adjust yourself a little for the fairies if needed and simply stream all 4 waves to the right, making sure to grab the life from the last one. And with that, we finish the stage portion itself and can now move on to the boss. EoSD's extra boss is Flandre Scarlet, the Sister of the Devil. I kind of don't have much to say on her. A lot of stuff is just speculation. I did find it kind of interesting, though, how in the prologue to the Esther stage, Patchy causes rain in order to keep Fawn inside the mansion. I would have thought that would make it easier for her to leave because that just blocked the sunlight. However, vampires are known to not be able to cross flowing water, and it seems like whether or not rain is a type of flowing water is open to author interpretation, and Zun seems to consider that it counts. And no, we are not going to have a debate about how to pronounce her name. I'm just going to be calling her Flandre from here on out anyway. Flandre's opening non-spell has her firing out double-layered red circles at random angles as she moves around the screen. I have to say, Flandre's non-spells are some of the most boring Danmaku in the entire series. I have nothing to say on this one. You know what circles are, right? You do? Okay, then you're good to go. Glad we had this talk. Flandre's first card is Taboo, Cranberry Trap. Zun mentions in the music comments for Shu So-gyoku that he likes how words like strawberry sound, so odds are he just named this card Cranberry Trap because he thought it sounded cool. Anyway, this one's a little difficult to explain, so I'll just keep it simple for both my sake and yours. Flandre summons patterns of magic circles at the corners of the screen that move along the walls in set directions. Some will fire out fixed angled purple bullets and some will fire out aimed blue ones. The only two non-static things about this card are Flandre's movement and your movement, which will determine where the blue bullets go. Start off by shotgunning Flandre. Her first movement will always take her upwards, so feel free to get as close as you want, but she'll typically move down next, so keep your distance and don't let her run into you. Once the blue bullets start showing up, head down to whichever side of the screen you and Flandre are closer to, and move through them once the circle at the bottom approaches the lower left. Staying low but not against the bottom of the screen, and let the purple bullets pass by you while they're still really sparse. After that will be blue bullets from all four corners. Slowly stream them upward toward the center of the screen, but don't go up so far that you actually reach the center. You'll know you've done it right if you have this cradle of blue bullets beneath you. Stay put while the next wave of purple bullets converges in the center, then once the blues have disappeared, head right a bit and start streaming the next wave counterclockwise back to the left corner. Once you're there, you can repeat that method indefinitely. Honestly though, this is way too much information because barring bad RNG with Flandre's movements, you will usually have this card down before it can loop. Unless, that is, you're using Reimu A. Other characters? They get to play Cranberry Trap. Reimu A? Well, let's just say that she calls it CBT instead. Likely due to an oversight, your amulets will arbitrarily home into the intangible magical circles instead, and make the card drag on for much longer than it normally does. Your natural route doesn't have to change, but if you're a Reimu A player, I'd recommend putting a bit more time and practice into this one to make sure you have it down. Flandre's second non-spell is... well, it's basically just her first one but faster. Zun could have totally made this more interesting. I played something once, was it a fan game maybe? I can't remember at the moment, but there was a vampire boss, and as her wings flapped, bullets would spawn from them. Flandre has this weird animation where smoke puffs flap like wings would, so making bullets spawn from that would have been kinda neat. Just dodge this one the same, but better. I'll start putting effort into my strategies for Flandre's non-spells when Zun starts putting effort into designing them. Flandre's second card is Taboo, Lævateinn. When I go to translate a fan game, it's a 50-50 whether or not the game's font will support the special character in this. It's always sad when they have to forgo using it. This card has Flandre swinging around a giant laser sword that'll leave trails of bullets in static positions behind it. Her first swing will be an overhead that'll cover the right side of the screen. She'll then move to the left and drag the sword toward the right, then back to the left, before ending with the same overhead swing, but on the other side this time. You know those fish that beat Pokemon Sapphire? As in, the actual, literal beta fish? I want you to bring them to me. I'll teach them how to be in Lævateinn in a day. Shotgun Flandre for a bit, then move over to the left. Sneak around the wave of bullets left in Lævateinn's wake, and move to the right edge of the screen, where Flandre will chase after you. Dodge through the big gaps in the bullets as you run away from her back toward the left, and then move through the last straight wave to her right before sneaking around the wall created by her second overhead swing. That was a lot of words and might sound complicated, but if you've been watching the card play out, you should have an idea of just how simple it really is. The only real thing to watch out for here is moving through the horizontal walls. If you get through them too slowly, Flandre will actually manage to catch up to you. Unless of course you're playing as Marissa, who is always and doesn't have to care. Do be careful that you move all the way to the right though. If you're not lumping the side of the screen like a 12-year-old Bleach fangirl when Flandre reaches you, you will get evaporated and you will remember it. Flandre's third non-spell is triple layered rings of bullets in random directions. These ones are less dense than the last ones, but quite a bit faster. Wait, are you expecting me to tell you how to dodge that? Let's just move on. Flandre's third spell is Taboo, 4 of a kind. Real wasted opportunity not going all in and making this card number 4. Flandre will summon 3 clones of herself, and all 4 Flandres will start firing out rings of red bullets. After a short delay, they'll also start firing out special patterns of large bullets in sequence. The first is a fixed 8-way yellow sunburst. The second is 7 lines of green bullets centered on you. The third is a triple layered ring of blue bullets with all 3 rings lined up. At a glance, the fourth one looks just like the third one, but the second ring will be out of sync with the other 2. The clones will always fire in a fixed order, but the real Flandre will begin acting out of turn as the card goes on. The real Flandre is marked with a spell circle for easy identification, by the way, and she's the one that fires pattern number 4. You can either shoot down the clones first, or just go straight for Flandre. I personally recommend the latter. The clones have quite a lot of HP, and frankly, if you can survive the card long enough to take them all out, you're probably skilled enough to just go for Flandre directly. The clones drop big power items when defeated, so you can go for a rare full power clear during a card which won't actually ruin your capture. Flandre's fourth non-spell is just the usual circles, but blue this time. Next, Flandre's fourth spell is Taboo, Kagome Kagome. Kagome Kagome is both the name of a Japanese children's game as well as the song sang during it. The caged bird in the song seems like a pretty obvious analogy for Flandre being trapped in the basement. Weirdly enough, this card and Lævateinn both use a different portrait for Flandre's cut-in, opting for a regular smile instead of the cheeky grin she usually has. Seems like an error, maybe? The card begins with Flandre making a pattern of horizontal and vertical lines across the screen. She'll then fire out 2 bubbles anywhere in a wide angle based on her position, which will trigger any green bubbles in their proximity to start moving as if they'd collided with them, though it takes a bit for them to actually start going. She'll then create a crisscross of diagonal lines toward the lower left corner before firing out 1 aim bubble like before, and a set of 3 with the middle one aimed directly at you. She'll then repeat this, but with the lines being angled toward the lower right instead. The only thing you really have to keep in mind with Kagome Kagome is your positioning. There's an obvious box created at the bottom of the screen in each wave. You'll want to stay in that region for the whole card. You can misdirect the aim bubbles to the edge of your cage if you'd rather have a bit more room to dodge around them. Flandre's fifth non-spell is the most interesting because it's bugged and she'll sometimes fail to actually fire anything. Alternatively, sometimes her bulls will spawn up screen above her and most of them will just be missing. Moving on. Flandre's fifth card is Taboo, Maze of Love. This one is a notorious beginner killer, much like Honest Man's Death from Imperishable Night. Flandre will fire out spirals of bolts that have gaps in them, forming a path that'll loop around her counterclockwise. She'll also shoot fast-moving triple-layered circles that'll miss the gaps as well as a good breadth around them. After the gaps reach 2 o'clock for the second time, she'll pause, then repeat the pattern clockwise in a different color. This second wave, however, will immediately transition back into counterclockwise after it does a full rotation to 6 o'clock. The intended method for this is to get relatively close to Flandre and circle around her, using the gaps as safe spots. After every blue wave, you want to get in position at 6 o'clock so you'll be ready for the red wave to start. Be especially careful of the transition period from red to blue. You can choose to either stay closer to Flandre and remain focused the entire time, or keep a little further away and incorporate a bit of unfocused movement, whichever you're more comfortable with. Now to address the obvious elephant in the maze. Yes, you can dodge this card at the bottom. No, it's not really that hard to do if you have a good grasp on where your hitbox is. Do I recommend it to casual players looking to beat Extra for the first time? Absolutely not. It'll end the card much faster, so I assume it's used for speedruns, and maybe score runs too? I don't know if ending cards faster for a higher bonus is better, or if you farm Grays instead. I know absolutely nothing about EoSD scoring meta, sorry. Non-spell 6 is... well, you tell me. Go on, describe this in an interesting manner. I dare you. By the way, this isn't actually non-spell 6 I'm showing you. It's just her 5th one again. This is non-spell 6. I bet you had no idea.
They're the same.
Non-spell.
Card number 6 is Forbidden Barrage, Starbow Break. The Forbidden Barrage part is a cute pun on Kindan, which would normally just mean forbidden, but here the second kanji is replaced with the bullet kanji from Danmaku. I looked into it, and a starbow, simply put, is a phenomenon said to occur when a spacecraft travels near light speed, where the light from the stars will appear to form a rainbow ring around your ship. However, it turns out that the theory behind the starbow assumed that all stars emitted the same wavelength of light for the sake of simplicity, and when actually applied practically, it turns out it doesn't work. In other words, starbows aren't a real thing, or at least they don't make a full rainbow. However, before news about the theory being wrong could get out, a science fiction author liked the idea so much that he put one on the cover of his book, immortalizing the mistake forever. Anyway, right, we're supposed to be playing Touhou. Flandre will create rainbows that expand outward from the center of the screen and move upward before falling down on you. Each wave will spawn lower than the last, and she'll restart after 4 waves. All of the bullets move perfectly straight, making them pretty simple to dodge most of the time. Follow Flandre around and just do damage as best as you can. Try to keep away from the very bottom of the screen to avoid getting trapped if a wall comes your way, but be cautious about moving too far up right before the 4th wave spawns. Its spawn point is really low on the screen. Okay, I usually don't like to mention safe spots, but for this one, I feel like I have someone breathing down my neck telling me that I just have to. The actual reason I tend to avoid mentioning them is because they can lean toward being pretty precise, and it's often more effort to use them than it is to just dodge normally. However, this one is really easy to use, so I'll make an exception this time. If you sit in the upper left at right about this spot, you'll never get hit by anything. The waves that go high enough to reach you harmlessly pass on by, and the waves that would hit you don't reach far enough to actually do so. This can be done on the right side too if you're center yourself with the left number of the timer, but it's awfully precise. If your goal is to be lazy and skip the card, why would you go out of your way and pick a harder method? I don't know, maybe some people are just weird like that. One more quick note. Contrary to popular misconception, Reimu's hitbox isn't smaller in all of the games. The first one to do that was Perfect Cherry Blossom, so you can use either safe spot here just fine as Marissa as well. Scratch what I said before, non-spell 7 is definitely the best. Not only is it still plagued by the same bug as the last one, but the circles aren't straight anymore, making it slightly more interesting to dodge. I'm really grasping at straws here, huh? Flandre's 7th card is Forbidden Barrage, Catadioptric. Let's see here. Belonging to, produced by, or involving both the reflection and the refraction of light. Okay, bouncing light, so bouncing bullets. Got it. Flandre begins by firing at a fan of 5 bubbles behind her with trails of other types behind them. They'll proceed to bounce off the ceiling as well as the walls as they make their way down the screen. She'll then move to the right and fire the same fan against the right wall, and then do the same thing on the left. Lastly, she'll make her way back to the right, firing out 5 bubbles straight up as she does, before returning to the middle and repeating the pattern. She won't actually make it all the way to the right during her last wave, leaving a sizable gap with no bullets. Starting from the second set onwards, her initial position will be a bit lower, leading to slightly different angles for the first wave shots. This one can actually be a little tricky if you don't position properly for it, but it's another easy card if you're prepared. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll get another 3 or higher on the star scale before the stage is over. Start the card off by shotgunning Flandre until her bullets bounce off the top of the screen. Once they start coming towards you, move downward and position yourself to the right of the one coming straight at you. You want to be right around here so the one from the upper left passes over you. Around when the tail end of its trail passes over you is when the bullets from Flandre's second wave will bounce, so move right through the first wave's lingering trail and underneath the lowermost bubble. Stay here for the third and fourth waves as well. It'll take a few waves, but this route will keep you super safe, easily making this a 1-star card if executed properly. Flandre's 8th and final non-spell has her firing out... Can you still call these circles? Maybe stars, actually? I don't think these are circles. Either way, she fires out 5 evenly spaced lines with 1 aimed at you. Just stream it. You know how to stream. I trust you. Here, as proof that I trust you, you can have the car keys. You can go out tonight, but only if you're back before 9, okay? Stay safe out there. We love you. You know the whole bit I did with the fish learning how to cap Lævateinn earlier? You think I could teach them how to design non-spells instead? How much time would that take? Betas apparently have an average lifespan of 2 to 5 years. Yeah, I think I could do that. It'd sure be better than whatever this shit. Card number 8 is Forbidden Barrage, clock that ticks away the past. This one's real weird. It consists of 3 parts that each utilize 2 big laser crosses. For the first part, they'll start in the lower left and upper right, then move across the screen before disappearing. New crosses will take their place and do the same, but in the opposite direction. For the third wave, the crosses will appear at Flandre's sides and move diagonally downward toward the center of the screen, passing through it before eventually stopping. During each part of the card, Flandre will also constantly fire aimed waves of bullets of differing speeds and density. She also fires a big fan of bullets to cover the top half of the screen to prevent any potential cheese. This one's another route heavy card. Think Royal Flare, but this time you can't skill check yourself past the walls if you're not positioned right for them. The first thing you want to remember here is that the lasers only have hitboxes when they're fully formed. When they're in the process of appearing or disappearing, they're totally harmless. With that in mind, you're safe to shotgun Flandre for a few seconds at the start before moving backwards to the very bottom of the screen. Once you're there, move to the left momentarily to avoid the clock hand coming your way, and then move back to the middle. Move at whatever pace you'd like, but if you're worried about this hand coming up from beneath the screen and hitting you, don't be. Play as aggressive as you want around it and focus solely on the aimed bullets. Starting the second wave in the middle also results in you only having to dodge one hand. Move to the right to avoid it, but watch out for the aimed bullets this time. They're actually really fast. Move back to the middle yet again for the final wave. Hug the bottom of the screen and both hands will pass by you harmlessly. If you're worried about this being precise, don't fret because it's anything but. Once the hands have passed by you, offset yourself to either side a little, then move straight up past the aimed bullets to avoid the hands coming up from the bottom. You only have to move about a quarter of the way up the screen before they'll fade away. I know that what I just explained probably sounds really complicated, but just like with Lævateinn, it's actually really simple and the card does a good job of steering you in the right direction. In the end, it's another flashy looking gimmick card with almost no actual skill required to dodge it. Do I like it? Yeah, I guess. It's memorable. Flandre's 9th card is Secret Barrage, and then will there be none? It's a survival card, and... wait a second, come to think of it, it's actually the only survival card in all of EoSD. It never occurred to me before, but I guess this was a pretty historical thing for Touhou, huh? Anyway, Flandre will start by turning herself into a blue orb, or at least that's what it looks like, but in reality those are just the bullet spawn effects, and there's no actual sprite there. She'll make a movement toward your position, all while constantly shooting out a 3-way spread of really slow bullets that'll form walls. How quickly she'll move toward you depends on your distance from her. After she moves 4 times, she'll disappear and another orb will appear in the center and do the exact same thing. Shortly after though, 4 more of the same orbs will appear in the corners one after another, but these ones will fade after just 3 movements instead. Their order is upper left, upper right, lower left, and lower right. You might notice that despite all that, there's still over 50 seconds left on the clock. That's because this card actually has two entirely distinct sections to it. In the card's second half, Fawn will summon patterns from outside the screen in a set order. She'll use 5 patterns in total, and after each set, she'll start using them faster. The first pattern has red bullets that'll bow inward toward the center. The second is made up of sparse, double-layered walls of blue bullets that'll cross over each other. Pattern number 3 has green walls that are aligned horizontally and vertically, but move diagonally, making them form gaps that keep opening and closing. Wave 4 is orange and bows inward kind of like the first wave, but at an angle instead. The last wave is the same as the fourth, but yellow and angled in the opposite direction. Fawn will just about get through 3 sets of waves before ending the card, finishing right before she can spawn a third yellow one. There's also these cute little lines of bullets that slide along the screen during this part, but we don't talk about those. You can't actually collide with them anyway, no matter how hard you try. Okay, let's route the first phase of this. Start off by positioning yourself to the lower right of Fawn, and yes, I'm going to call the orb Fawn. I want you to picture a box around her starting position. You're going to make her move clockwise to all 4 corners, starting with the lower right and ending with the upper right. Rather than finishing the loop by returning to the lower right of the box, move down near the lower right corner of the screen itself. Once there, wait for the new orbs to start spawning. Slowly inch to the left to avoid getting tagged by the center one, and once you see the lower left one spawn and start moving towards you, move past it to the lower left corner. Once there, inch upward until you're pressured to move, then head toward the upper left. Wait there for as long as you can before heading to the upper right and moving down through the bullets to reach the bottom middle of the screen. The longer you can manage to wait in the upper left, the less lingering bullets you'll have to deal with in the card's second half. Just to recap, the 5 orbs part is dodged in a similar way to the part prior to it, but with a bit of tapping along the first 2 corners, and with a slightly different second half. Part of why I had you dodge in a square during the first part was to get you familiar with the concept since I wanted to use it again here. Part 2 of the card is mostly self-evident. Dodge through the red, orange, and yellow waves early before they compress themselves too tight. I recommend staying at the bottom middle for the first 2 sets of waves. The last set can be a bit tricky since they'll all spawn really quickly after one another. As soon as the third red wave begins heading back outward, the center of the screen has a big safe spot in it, but reaching it requires passing through multiple waves at once and can be a bit tricky. The safest way I've found to get into it is to position yourself just to the right of the center of the screen, then sit just above the lowest line in the last wave of blues. Okay, technically this is the second lowest line, but I said we don't talk about the wall bullets. Sit there and let the red wave pass over you, and then move upwards into the safe spot, where you can wait at the last couple seconds of the card. Fawn's final and most difficult card by far is Q.E.D, ripples of 495 years. She'll create dense ripples of bullets in the air that'll bounce off the top and side of the screen a single time as they move. As her HP drains, not only will the ripples start moving faster, but she'll start firing them more rapidly too. Start off by shotgunning Fawn and moving downward as the bullets begin pushing you back. You'll gradually dodge lower and lower as this card goes on, but as always, staying higher whenever possible gives you more room to retreat and consider your options if things start to look iffy. When it comes to the horizontal ripples that'll come at you from the walls, you'll want to proactively move toward whichever one is going to reach you first, and dodge through it to avoid having to go through both at once. However, this all goes out the window for the last few seconds of the card, where you'll pretty much just have to bottom hug and pray. You might be wondering about something. If the card only gets harder when Fawn's HP gets low, can't you just not shoot her? Well, yes and no. Your observation is both astute and naive, because as it turns out, this card has a rage phase. If you're foolish enough to let the card tick down to 30 seconds, Fawn will start firing as if she's on 1 HP, or at least it looks like the speed is the same to me. Good luck surviving 30 seconds of this. I'm sure some crazy masochists have timed this out, but the list must be pretty small. And there you have it, that's the end of EoSD Extra. All in all, I think it's one of the easiest Extra stages in the series. There are no real snags in the stage itself. Flandre Nonspells are all free passes, and almost every card in the stage is either trivialized by some relatively simple routing, or just isn't very hard to begin with. I hesitated on whether to rate Q.E.D as 4 or 5. The last few seconds are really difficult, but the thing is, they're just that. Only a few seconds. When you stack it up to the hardest cards in the main game, it just can't compete. That's to be expected though. Extra isn't supposed to be on the same level as Lunatic to begin with. If you're going for your first Extra clear, the cards I recommend putting extra time into making sure you've got down are Royal Flare, Cranberry Trap, and Then There Were None, and Q.E.D. If you make it to the end of the stage and still have bombs left, don't hesitate to use them to make it through Q.E.D. Good luck and happy practicing. Why hello there, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I've got a few more quick thoughts to share, so stick around if you'd like to hear them, but first I'd like to list off my Patreon supporters, who help support both my fangame translation and content creation efforts. Their names are as follows: Herite, Andrew FM, Awkward Burb, Vicious, Sinon's on Roll, Dragon Realms, Exodus, Grazy124, Harun, Javrinichan, Carbonic aka Quinn, Kojinue, Laplas, Plutonium Pie, Skeleton, Yo-Yo, and Zakkun. I re-evaluated my mic situation after my last video and determined that the fan noise from my PC was hurting my quality a fair bit. After initially bringing a laptop into my closet and trying to record in there, I settled on recording with said laptop at my desk instead, with my PC turned off. Hopefully I should sound a little less muffled now. I think the rest of my audio quality issues can be chalked up to my throat always being clogged, which I plan on seeing a doctor about in the near future, as well as my delivery, since I'm not super used to sitting in front of the mic and recording yet. I know I took some digs at Zun's Danmaku design this time around. I obviously don't mean anything hurtful by it. I love and treasure the whole series, including EoSD. But excluding Violet, it may be a little while before I put out another video, since I'll likely be starting a new fan game translation project on Sunday, but I suppose next up will be PCB Lunatic unless I decide to pepper in an untranslated fan game overview instead. We'll just have to see. This has been Hawkeye Blue, and I'm really sick of listening to You and No One Was Her.